I think it was the summer picnic where we got those oversized boxing gloves and we had this match between two of the biggest, baddest guys at Redfin. And the head of HR, who was probably miscast as a head of HR, was going between them saying, this other guy says he's really going to kick your ass. He says he's going to throw down on you. And then they got in there and one guy just destroyed the other guy. And he had to go to an emergency room, the one who got destroyed, because he hurt his shoulder.
Yes.
And the time, we weren't offering healthcare insurance for him. And also at the time.
On this episode of Real Estate Insiders Unfiltered, we talk about Redfin, employee-based agents to more traditional. We talked about clear cooperation policy. We talked about the NAR settlement, all from the man himself at Redfin. Tune in. It's going to be an incredible show. You talk about it privately. We talk about it publicly. This is the Real Estate Insiders Unfiltered podcast. Welcome again to the Real Estate Insiders Unfiltered podcast. I'm your host, James Swiggins, along with crazy Uncle Keith, not known as Keith Robinson. We're just going to stick with the previous from now on.
No one calls me that anymore anyway.
Keith, tell us about one of the most interesting interviews that we have had, and probably one of our favorites so far, I would say.
Yeah.
Mr. Glenn Kelman, the CEO of Redfin.
Yes. It was great. Thoughtful, thought-provoking, honest. We covered how he went from a tech nerd to learning and understanding the importance of the human being in a real estate transaction and what that journey was like, what it was like operating and launching an employee-based real estate company, some of the ways that that's different, and then also his recent pivot in some markets away from that. He talked about that. He talked about NAR, some of his frustrations with the settlement and some things that he agreed with. And he shared what he would do if he was the United States real estate czar for a day and what things he would implement. Thoughtful, interesting conversation.
He was authentic, transparent. Like him or not, like what I love about the guy is he is just who he is and says what he thinks. And we appreciate that on this show. So it's going to be an incredible show. Everybody tune in. Glenn, welcome to the podcast. We are very excited to have you. Yes. Keith and I were chatting about how we've seen you speak a lot, and you are authentic. You have a lot of candor. You're passionate about things.
You have opinions.
And you have opinions, which is great. That fits really well on this show.
Good for a pod.
So thank you for coming. We know you're busy. There's certainly no shortage of stuff going on in residential real estate these days. But let's start with, for the viewers and listeners, just give them a little bit about your background. How you got to this role, what you're doing in this role, like what you've been working on, just to give a little bit of context to who Glenn is.
Well, first of all, thanks for having me. It's an honor to be here.
Thanks for being here.
I started in technology. So when I was 25, I co-founded an enterprise software company called Plumtree Software. In 2002, it went public. But then in 2005, an older brother who couldn't stop drinking needed some help. I moved from San Francisco back to Seattle, and there I met David Eracker, the founder of Redfin. He was running this website out of his apartment with two other dudes, and it was the best day in my life, except for when my children were born and when I got married, of course.
Right.
Professionally, it was such a great stroke of luck.
Is the children over your shoulder? Is that the pictures
behind you? They're over my shoulder. Yeah, that's them. Yeah. They're a little older now. Yeah. Aren't we all? But
every day. Yeah.
Anyway, I thought I was just going to build a real estate website, and we ended up building a real estate brokerage. I was sort of put out that I had to deal with home buyers and home sellers and real estate agents and everything in between. But it's been the best thing that ever happened to me times two. Just because I love our agents. I love being in a customer service business. I love doing the real work instead of just pushing around ones and zeros.
Yeah. Yeah. You got out of the matrix. You're into the chaos of humanity. Just barely.
Just curious on that before we dive into some of our rapid fire, which our viewers and listeners always know we ask. So you went from tech into what was supposed to be tech and then into real estate, whereas you and I both know there is nothing normal about this business. What was that like? Like that transition from, software, selling the business, going public, all of that, and then into this crazy world.
Well, it was a really good transformation for me just because I thought of myself as this black turtleneck Steve Jobs type. I was going to be Mr. Cool, visionary, Silicon Valley. And then working with real estate agents just seemed to be a come down from that. I still remember being at a party back in San Francisco when I was visiting my old tech friends, and they said, "Hey, look, it's Glenn Kelman. Now he's a real estate agent." And I said, "Hey, we run a website too, but now I'm proud of it. I'm proud that we do the real work. I'm proud that we walk people through houses and crawl through crawl spaces and clean out garages." I think that history has judged well the people who actually work with other human beings and help them find a better life. Yeah. And so it's been good for me personally, just because I was sort of a stuck-up little nerd. And now I've been humbled by the real estate industry, but also enlightened, ennobled. I don't know what. Just some of my best friends at Redfin have been the people working all over the country as real estate agents. We've had people who've been together with me for 10, 15, some nearly 20 years. And it's just the deepest professional friendships I've ever had.
I think sometimes people don't understand that it is a noble profession, right? Like
it is.
It's a service business and a shepherding of a human being through a process that just happens to be monetized through the sale of a home, right? But it's more about the human beings and the transaction and shepherding their emotions and being an advocate for them than
I love the word shepherding. Yeah. Keith, that's poetry.
Well, I try.
Yes.
Don't toot his horn too much, because he'll start throwing all these ones out there.
Yeah,
so
I'm just getting started.
Going.
Stay tuned, Glenn.
Keep going.
Stay tuned. Well, speaking of poetry, I'm going to hit you with the first rapid fire question, which is not poetry. It's random as heck, but I'm excited to hear your answer. If you could be a superhero, who would it be and why?
I think it would be Spider-Man, just because I'd love soaring between the big buildings in Manhattan. Yeah. Doesn't that look fun?
It does. It does.
Actually, no one's picked Spider-Man yet, and we've done 54, 55 of these episodes in the past 12 months, and that was, it's been all over the place.
We get a lot of Superman.
Yeah,
we get a fair bit of Superman.
He's so generic, though.
Well, yeah, but he's like generic in all of the like good ways, right? Like the sort of cardboardy good ways.
We had one of our favorites was somebody had said that he was talking to his daughter about who should I pick, because we knew we were going to ask this question, and she's like, you need to pick Fat Thor, because in that particular when Thor was going through that, we were just dying of laughter. He's like, if I was a superhero, I want to be Fat Thor, with he's doing the chain thing and the beer,
getting in shape. Yeah,
I've had some good ones, Glenn. There's been some good ones on here.
Proof you shouldn't ask your teenagers anything. That's what that proves. That's what that proves. I think it's a good answer, Spider-Man, because if you think about it, like he was the science nerd, right? Who then got this opportunity to really help people. Not dissimilar to the journey that you've been on, right? The internet technology guy who now is in a position where you really want to help people. So that maps. I think that's a good answer.
James, you got to pour it on. Have you always known that your partner Keith is a poet? This is so lyrical.
Yeah. No, how do you think I got where I am in life?
Yeah.
I like the soaring between buildings.
Yeah, no, it's
not the personal transformation, but I'll take that too.
Yeah. Here's a little fact for you. You will not meet many people who reads more books than that guy right there. So
probably, sadly true.
Yeah. One of the reasons why the next question I'm going to ask you is actually in here is because this is how Keith gets his reading list.
It is. I just order them immediately.
He literally does. Every guest we have. So we always ask the next question. So favorite book or podcast that you're reading or you've listened to recently, and then usually if somebody says a book, Keith is ordering on Amazon during the show. So
well, Keith, are you going to answer the question first?
No,
since you're the most well-read among us.
No, it's you. No, this is you. You're the guest.
I'll answer too if you want, but you have to go first.
I do want.
Okay,
but I'll go first. Min-Jin Lee's Pachinko. It's this beautiful epic novel that spans 3 or 4 generations of Koreans living in Japan. And I don't know why it moved me so much, but maybe it's because even the villains are heroes and even the
Mm,
heroes are villains, that when you think you understand someone, it gives you empathy to see how they can take the other side too. And I
Interesting.
just have been reading books to my kids where, right away the villain shows up in black and the
yeah,
hero shows up in white,
it's very two
and they are
dimensional, right?
immediately able to identify the good guy and the bad guy. And I think it's led to the polarization of America.
Mm,
It's led to a certain siege mentality within our own little brains where we try to decide, is this guy on my side or is
mm,
he against me?
Hmm.
And the real world is so much more nuanced and complicated than that. And particularly my history in real estate and business has taught me that there are no real villains. There are people you disagree with sometimes, there are people you compete with, but every one of us is at heart a good person. And that goodness shines through in this novel, even though it's also a searing indictment of how society crushes people and how there are good and bad in
yeah,
all of us. That's my pitch.
I like it.
I
That's a
like
good
it.
one. Oh,
And
I
Give it to me,
relevant.
Keith. What have you
Oh.
got?
okay. So the recent one would be Unreasonable Hospitality, um, which is
Oh,
phenomenal. It's as a real estate guy, I tend to read everything through the lens of how could, should, would this apply to residential real estate. So
yeah.
it's a Will Guardia, I think, is the author. It's about how he got his restaurant to become the number one restaurant in the world, and he did it all through a irrational, unrealistic commitment to hospitality. And if you think about our industry and the service component of our industry, there's a lot of corollaries and things
Oh,
that
for
make
sure.
sense in the book
Yeah.
that are not in a restaurant, but in a real estate transaction. How can you don't just exceed expectations, like detonate them into the atmosphere, right? Like
Oh,
do
man.
fewer things, but do them at a level that just dazzles and amazes, because humans like to tell stories, and if you can create a story worthy event in someone's life through this process, then they will share it. So that's probably my favorite recent one.
See, James, don't you think that Keith's answer was better than mine?
No
Let's
way.
spin this
Actually,
podcast around.
You know.
so it's interesting because they're both so relevant to the world
The world
today. We
today,
are the
yeah.
most polarized. We couldn't be more polarized
Yeah.
if humanly possible. And looking at things differently. I love what you said actually, Glenn, about, it's not that somebody's an enemy or they're, we may have differing opinions on stuff, but we can still have a
Yeah.
conversation about it. And at the
Yeah.
same time, what I also love about what Keith's talking about is, I talk about this a lot recently, and we'll get into this, I'm sure, in our discussion, but there's value in having someone help you through something
Mhm.
that's very
Yeah.
strenuous and stressful and emotional and levels of service. People want to be taken care of because life has enough. I have a 3-year-old. My wife has a career. I have a career, and we look for ways to have somebody else make things easier for us all the time, and there's
Yeah.
value in that. And so it's just there's a lot of relevance in today's world with where we are and the decisiveness. So I think they're both great answers, and honestly, um, I never thought about what you just said about colors and how we assume. It's interesting,
Oh,
like,
yeah.
how we
Whole
size
nother
people
riff
up
on
is
that.
just
Yeah.
it's sad. I'll make a comment and then we'll move on just for time's sake. I only have one child, and I love her dearly depending upon the moment. I'm sure all parents can relate to that. Um, but it's amazing to me how she sees nothing the way that adults do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They're just, there to her, it's another 3-year-old and they go run off, and my daughter has zero lack of confidence, and she just grabs another kid's hands and they go run off into the
Come on.
playground. And I'm like,
Yeah.
that is just, how do we protect that?
Yeah.
Is something I think that every parent and everyone in society should think about, because she hasn't been tainted by anything yet.
Yeah. We start out
So
perfect. We
start,
start out
yeah,
I still
start out
remember
perfect.
when my first friend who had a baby put us together. I was
perfect.
with this little toddler and I was in my 20s. and this kid just grabbed my hand.
Yeah.
And I felt like, hey, don't we need to get to know each other first? Like,
Nope.
shouldn't we go to dinner? And just the immediacy and the physicality of that,
Yeah.
and the fact that she trusted me, not knowing me from Adam.
Yeah.
It felt like a precious, precious gift.
Yeah.
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 And then
It
we
is.
teach them because of we teach them all these
Yeah.
different things,
Yeah.
obviously. And
Yeah.
so I think it's a very interesting thing for people to read, especially with where the world is today.
All right,
Keith, give us the last
rapid
one.
fire. Yep. If you could have lunch with one person, current or historical, who would it be and why?
Doesn't everyone say Jesus?
I'm
I'm going to say that, and
You
I'm
had
sort
that-
of Jewish,
Yeah.
but it's sort of a revolution in
Yeah.
human
Yeah.
thought. Turn the
Mhm.
other cheek, love, grace.
It's a great answer.
It's a great
I
I just
answer.
want to,
Yeah.
you know,
That's a good answer.
That would-
We've
that
had
would be
we've
a
had
good
them all
thing.
over the place.
Is
That
it
would be-
sacrilegious?
No. Why would it be sacrilege?
You do you. Yeah.
Jesus would want to have lunch with people, I think. right?
Pretty sure he
That's
would.
how he shared his
I hope
word
so.
in the Bible. At least
Yeah.
if you read the Bible, that's what it says. So yeah, no, that's not sacrilegious.
All
What's
right.
the most common answer?
I'd
all
say
over the
like
map.
my usually a family member
a
that's
lost
passed.
family member. Yeah.
Lost family
A
member.
oh,
Yeah. Usually it's like
Oh.
mom, dad, or a
Yeah.
grandmother or something like that.
Yeah.
We've had some good
And-
ones though.
And Jesus
So-
has been a not uncommon one. Yeah.
No.
Fair number.
Good.
All right. So lots of stuff to get through. Keith, you want to kick us off on the first one?
Sure. I
And,
guess at some point we should transition to like real estate-ish stuff.
Mhm.
So there's no easy segue for this, but I'm curious with someone who's been in the industry as long as you have. I think you started in 2005 as the CEO. You went through the crash in 2008. You've been through the last 4 years of chaos that we have all been through. What have you learned along the way? Were there guiding principles were there critical moments, maybe things that you got right or wrong or whatever, but from a leadership standpoint, what have you learned along the way that has carried you through
It's a really
since
good question.
2005? Yeah.
Oh, wow. Well, I'll answer that first, just in terms of the substance of real estate.
Mm-hmm.
I think I am the worldwide expert on what parts of a real estate transaction can be automated. And I'm still an advocate for technology to elevate the real estate agent, to let her focus on the customer, to take care of everything in the back office. But mostly it's been a humbling experience that when you try to automate advice and emotional support, what you might call shepherding, Keith, it fails miserably. And that,
for a technologist,
has
is that
actually been-
hard? Is that
What?
for a technologist, is that a difficult realization to accept?
it was, but now it's uplifting to me.
Yeah.
I'm in my 50s. I worry that computers are going to get rid of people and all sorts of beautiful things about how we interact with one another. And to me, it's a great source of reassurance and comfort that someone is always going to need the support of another human being as they go through this chrysalis in their life. So that would be what I would tell myself. If I could get in a time machine right now and go back to 2005, I'd tell the younger Glenn Kelman, technology is a good bet. It's a great way to meet customers. It's a great way to automate the back office. But there's still something essential that happens between an agent and his or her customer that you shouldn't touch. So that would be what I've learned about real estate. And I carry that into the discussion we're undoubtedly going to have today, which is how is this industry going to change because of the NAR settlement, because of artificial intelligence, whatever lions and tigers and bears traditional agents are worried about. I think I can be somewhat reassuring. And then what I've learned just as a leader.
Yeah. I mean, you went through some pretty interesting times during real estate. Keith and I were there too. Like 2008 wasn't fun.
No.
No,
that was not pleasurable.
No, it was not pleasurable time for a few years there. It was really rough. But like, what are some of the things you learned from a leadership perspective?
Well, do you want to answer the question first? I
No.
feel like you know more than I do.
Not
I don't
at
know
all.
why you're asking me the questions.
Because I think
that's how podcasts work, Glenn.
Yeah,
We ask the
you're the
questions.
guest, man.
You give
All
thoughtful
right,
answers.
but I hope it could be a dialogue.
It can. We're just teasing.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I don't
for
pretend
We're not
to know
shy
it all.
on this podcast. So
Yes.
I guess I've learned that the most important quality of a human being is the quantity of our energy.
Mm,
So
mm,
you can get through hell, but if you project this sense that you believe in
mm,
your team
mm.
and that you have confidence that in the end we will find a way to win, people will go with you into the dark cave,
Yeah.
down into the dank hole, over the snowy pass. And you don't have to tell them that it isn't going to be cold or that it isn't going to be dark. You should tell them this might be hard. But if you end with, but I know we can make it because
Yeah.
I believe in you and I believe in us, people will walk through hell for that.
Yeah. Yeah. That crystallization of vision, right? That sense of purpose that you need is so important, especially in downtimes. Or we were having a conversation earlier this morning about the difference between a bit of I don't love it when people use this analogy, but a wartime leader versus a peacetime leader, right? And some of the skill sets uh, aren't the same, and some are, but one that is universal is that need for communicating with people where we're going, truth telling about how you're going to get there.
And I don't think you necessarily have to be a visionary. That always helps if you can predict the future and
Hmm.
project that to people in a compelling way. I just mean that there's also this emotional component to it, that even if you're not as smart as Elon Musk, you
Which
can
I'm not.
say, I believe in us and I
Mm-hmm.
know that we will find a way.
Yeah.
Um, and at least for Redfin, it has also helped because sometimes our agents have made money and sometimes we have just been a disaster zone. If you have some sense of moral compass,
Mm.
because if the only reason you get into real estate is to make money instead of shepherding people to a better life, there are going to be times when the money isn't that great and you wonder, what am I doing here? But if, even in the best of times, you really believe that this is the highest calling, that if you have to sell something, selling a better life,
Mm.
supporting people when their kids are crying at them and all their stuff is in a U-Haul and everybody's mad because we're moving across the country.
Mm.
That is a noble calling. And so I think the moral dimension of real estate has sustained us through the cycle. And if it was just about the Benjamins, 2008 would
Would
have
have
nuked you
cratered
to the
it.
core.
yeah,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah. You know what's
Yeah.
interesting? I remember when, like I mentioned, I've seen you speak multiple times on different stages, and I'm listening to you talk about it. And the comment about vision, it's certainly one path to go. I think what's interesting and why people follow you is because of your authenticity,
Mm.
and that's compliment, to be clear. Like you are.
Mm,
You say what you think, and you, even if people don't agree with you, it doesn't hold you back from sharing your opinions. And I think people are tired of corporate speak, political correctness to
yeah.
some degree, and they're looking for someone to just be like, just this is where we are. Like, we're not doing good, but we're gonna figure it out, and I'm gonna be right at the front with you doing it.
Yeah.
Or
Yeah.
we're doing great, and this is what our plans
Let's
are.
keep it
But
up. Yeah.
I think a lot of leaders try to uh, portray something that may not be accurate. A funny story, and then we'll go to another question
I
here. But
want to hear it.
Keith and I met in 2008,
Yeah.
9. Yeah.
Yeah. I think 8.
You'll appreciate this. We were at a meeting with a bunch of large real estate companies, and we all know what 2008 was like.
Yeah.
It sucked. And
It's
so
very
we're
technical
in a
term.
room with all of these executives, and everyone's going around the table introducing themselves and being like, yeah, we're doing this, we're doing that, blah, blah, blah. And Keith and I are like, you guys are all full of shit. Like, there's no scenario where any of you are in a good spot. Like, no, none of
Yeah.
that's actually happening. Like, we've had to fire staff. Our agents are starving. There's like 10% of the people are doing all the REO business. And then Keith and I went to a bar. We left the meeting. We're like, we're gonna go have a cocktail and a burger and just pontificate. That went from 2 hours to 4 to 6 to 8 because we were just being authentically who we
Oh
are.
man.
It's interesting when you go around a room, right? And you're in this horseshoe shape, and everyone is, tell us where you're from and how you're doing, right? The classic icebreaker, right? And I remember every person was like, I'm from here and it's going great. I'm from here and it's going great. I'm like, no, it isn't. And then James finally was the first one to be like, I don't know what market you guys are in, but I'm from here and it's hard. It's hard as hell and I'm tired.
My P&L sucks.
Yeah,
Like, you know, there's nothing good going on right now, everybody.
Was the rest of the room grateful?
We didn't go back. I don't know. James and I went to lunch, and that lunch turned into a dinner. It was probably an 8-hour conversation from noon to 8, and where we really, technically, we were competitors, I guess, but we were sharing and masterminding and curating how to build our businesses better, because there's enough business for all of us, and we weren't getting from that specific meeting. We weren't getting a ton in that room. We got much more. We got much more from just sharing openly what we were struggling with and masterminding solutions and brainstorming solutions together.
So, and that's a good lead into a question I want to ask, because I think we have been following Redfin for a long time, and you know, you guys, and if I get this wrong, please correct me, by the way. So
you probably won't.
You guys were starting, in my understanding was you were starting with employee-based agents, around the concept of controlling the consumer experience and then being able to provide essentially a lower fee structure. Is that correct? And if not, correct me on that. And I want to ask then a follow-up. How has that changed over the years? What have you learned about that model, especially in this world where everyone's talking about model changes in residential real estate?
It's technically correct. I just think that the decision to employ agents wasn't calculated based on desire to control the consumer experience.
Okay.
It was almost out of naivete that I came from tech, and I just couldn't imagine that people who are my colleagues wouldn't be employed. And there was this, I think it was the summer picnic where we got those oversized boxing gloves and we had this match between two of the biggest, baddest guys at Redfin, and the head of HR, who was probably miscast as a head of HR, was going between them saying, this other guy says he's really going to kick your ass. He says he's going to throw down on you. And then they got in there and one guy just destroyed the other guy, and he had to go to an emergency room, the one who got destroyed, because he hurt his shoulder. Yes. And at the time, we weren't offering healthcare insurance for him. And also at the time, my wife was a doctor, but only training to be a doctor. She's still a doctor. So she was like a medical resident. And she's like, well, if he doesn't have insurance, you know, I could yank it back in. And he's like, okay. And then she said, well, actually, it sort of requires a really hard yank. So why don't we get Glenn to do it? I'll tell him what to do. And then the guy was like, I don't know about this. And then I'm driving to the emergency room and I'm just thinking, what are we doing? Why does this person not have insurance when I do, when we're both working really hard to make Redfin successful? And I now know, I'm not trying to teach my book here. I know there's a case to be made for 1099 agents.
Sure.
And there's lots of upside that you get when you don't have an employer, a nanny state, whatever you want to call it. But it's been hard for me to walk away from the commitment that you should have to everybody else you work with. And that's sometimes held us back, but it's also sometimes propelled us forward.
Interesting. Yeah. What was it going deep on, which is awesome story, by the way. Yeah. I love the fact it started over a boxing match. You don't know this, by the way, but this individual right here is literally, he boxes almost every day. So like that was his favorite.
Really?
That me,
yes. Keith is a boxer. Has for
oh my gosh.
Yeah. So I've been on the receiving end of it, but not with the fake ones in the actual ring. And
you asked for it.
Not fun.
Literally. You literally asked for it. But I've been trying to get trial by combat into our corporate docs so that, like, you know, when we can't agree on something, we just, you know,
at least there's a decision.
It's clear. Who's right and wrong is clear if you box about it. Anyway.
But I just learned that you started this thing based upon a boxing match, and you're like, we need to have health insurance. I just think that's a really good story.
That is beautiful.
What have you learned about, because a lot of people here that are listening to this pod are quote unquote traditional. Let's say they're all 1099. Yeah. What are some of the takeaways you've learned about when you employ agents? What are things that worked well? What things didn't work well? I mean, I'm really curious because there's very few people that have actually done it, let alone pulled it off in any capacity.
Well, number one, that real estate agents aren't communists. We actually started by paying the same fee for a $3 million sale or a $300,000 sale because it just seemed fair, or we would pay the same compensation to the agent. And then all the agents who could sell $3 million houses quit because they felt like suckers. They knew that the market would pay them much more than that. So even if it's a similar amount of work, it is not the same amount of work. High-end customers are much more demanding. That was sort of the first lesson in the basic entrepreneurialism of the agent. And you think I would have figured it out by now, but Redfin Next, which we may end up talking about at some point, where we finally eliminated salaries for agents in some of our coastal markets and just put them on a really aggressive bonus plan, is the latest installment in that. And what we found is that the more upside you give the agent, the better agent you will attract, the better agent you will keep, and the better your service will be. And so I started out more suspicious of variable pay than I should have been. Whenever you're in a store and you really want great service, you're looking for a salesperson because you know they're the most motivated to help you. If you get a chance to press 1 or press 2 on a phone tree for service or sales, and you need someone to pick up the phone quickly,
press 2.
Press 2. Yeah. Actually, it's always 1. I should have had it the other way around.
Yeah,
nobody
should be
service.
first. Sales is first. Service is second.
So anyway, that's the journey that we've been on. And I think we've struck a good balance, at least for us, where agents feel like they're going to get enough demand from the website and get sort of this business in a box where they, on day one, they have field agents to help them with tours on nights and weekends. They have a transaction coordinator to help them drive volume. But they still have the upside, especially on their self-source deal, where they can make as much as 70% of the commission if they're the ones who found the customer.
Got it. And are they 1099 or are they are still on?
They're not 1099, and it still gives us fits because people want to be able to write off some of their business expenses. Just because of the way we tax it, it's taxed when we pay the bonus, whereas when you're on commission, that can happen at the end.
Right.
And then there's still people who say, I don't want to pay for health insurance. I get it through my partner, and yet my bonus is limited because of the health costs that you bear. So there's still some ways in which we have socialized some of our costs across all of our agents, where the top performers just want the maximum amount of upside. And I think the other thing that we're trying to address within our ranks is there are just some agents who have met so many customers through the website that they're off the website, that they have such a network of referrals.
They're at capacity
they don't need any more redfin.com promotion. And so those people, the ones who are my longest old time friends, say, I feel like a sucker working here because most of this business would follow me if I went to a traditional brokerage, and your pay should reflect that. And so that's one of the major reasons that we had to start offering these really big splits. If the customer is asking for you by name and not for Redfin, who do we owe the business to? Do we owe it to the agent, or do we owe it to the platform? And when we owe it to the agent, we have to pay the agent. And that has been overdue.
When you go through, that feels like, from the outside looking in, a somewhat significant pivot, right, for your company. And I'm curious, you're publicly traded, you've got a board, you've got shareholders. When you're thinking through that kind of a pivot, how much harder is it? Or just unpack that a little bit, that you feel comfortable, given the fact that you're publicly traded and all that. But that's such a big pivot. And I'm just curious about that thought process for you. Is it something that takes a longer time, that you have to get consensus on? How does that work?
Being publicly traded hasn't held us back because we're publicly traded at $5 or $6 a share. So maybe if we were trading at $50 a share, we'd feel like we had more to lose. But right now, our backs are against the wall, and we feel like we just got to go out and grab a bunch of share. If there's a way that real estate ought to be practiced, we shouldn't evolve toward that. We should just do it now. And that has been liberating. We talked about all the BS that happens in industry forums when it's 2008 or 2022 and home sales are really down. But in a way, and I'm not trying to gild the lily at all,
No,
it
you're giving
is,
a thoughtful answer. It's great.
yeah, it is liberating
Mm-hmm.
because we've got to change or die. And
Right.
all the things that you were planning to do over the next 2 or 3 years, why don't we do them right now? Because now is the time to compete or die.
Yeah.
And so I've enjoyed
What's
my job more over the past 6 to 12 months than I have in a long time. And I've always loved it. It's always been really stressful too. And it's especially stressful now. But I really believe in what we're doing. Um, and I like the entrepreneurial side of my own job. There are some
Mm.
times when you're managing the business, and there are other times when you're driving change. And
Yeah.
driving change can be fun. It's stressful and harrowing and awful too, but it's also fun.
Yeah. But Glenn, this is so I want to. This is a compliment as well because a lot of people will criticize. Um, a lot of people are going to criticize sort of the original model that
Yeah.
you had, but at the same time, you also were trying new things that no one else was willing to try, and I think that's admirable because you were providing healthcare, you were salarying people or putting them on
Yeah.
payroll, trying different models, and a lot of our industry doesn't do that, right? They don't actually try something new. They follow sort of the same program as it's
Mm.
been. And you've also shifted, right? So you've done that, and you're learning, and you're making those changes. As Keith was saying, to pivot, but I don't know. I think people don't give you enough credit for going out there and trying to actually put new methods in place and see what works and throw some stuff on the wall and see if it sticks. So, um,
Oh, well, that's nice of you to say, but I, late at night when I go to bed, I think about all the dumb stuff that I did 10 or 15 years ago, and I sure wish we could have figured it out faster. And I think
mhm.
some of that is just a byproduct of really having a lot of confidence in my abilities to build a website or to work with a team building a website, to be more
Yeah,
accurate,
yeah,
and less confidence about how real estate really works. After 18 years in this industry, I now feel like I understand real estate as well as I understand technology.
hmm,
And the source of shame for me about these early years actually isn't the mistakes. I sort of face plan or face palm over some of those mistakes because they're just so dumb. But the shame is that I was brash about it. I just wish that I could have come into the industry and just been a little more humble. Sometimes when I see younger people now, I just think, oh, maybe if you just listened a little more.
yeah,
And then I
right.
tell myself, oh, you know what? They've got to figure that out on their own. They're going to go through the same cycle that all of us go through. Um, but when you're a CEO and you have such a large stage to reach other people,
Sure.
um, you need to mature much faster than
Yeah,
that.
for sure. You don't know what you don't know, and it certainly is common. People jump into the business and think it's one way. I mean, how I've been
I
literally in
know.
this my whole life, and I can meet tech companies and they'll come out with an idea and they're like, we're going to do this, we're going to do that. And I'm like, you don't understand the realtor. That is not something they're going to do. Like,
Yeah.
it's a learning process. Um, I want to ask you some questions around, obviously the lawsuit and things that are happening. I know you're, I think, still a defendant in some of this. So if I ask you something you can't
Yeah.
answer, then just, that's
Well,
totally
well,
fine.
before we move on, though,
Yeah.
just one final point about all of
Yeah.
this. I think that sometimes people assume that because Redfin has changed, that our mission has changed.
Mm,
That because we've tried to take the best of the technology world and the traditional world, that somehow we're no longer a consumer advocate. But that
right.
fire for me is undimmed.
Yeah.
I just now think that there's a lot we can learn from traditional brokerages about how to be on the consumer side. And I still believe, by the way, that there's something that we can bring to it, something that's different about us. But I think that's the narrative, the only narrative really that bothers me, which is that I got into this to make real estate better for everyday people. And 15 years later, I'm just trying to line my pocket. I made plenty of money at Plumtree.
Yeah.
Um, the reason I'm doing this is for the reason that James talked about at the outset, that I just really have never found a higher calling. And I really believe that we can all make real estate better. So anyway,
That's
I
a
just
great,
didn't
that's
want
a,
you to think I'm a sellout,
no,
James.
not at all.
I'll
Not
get
at
off the
all.
soapbox.
I
Let's
didn't,
talk about the settlement,
no,
whatever
no,
you
no.
want.
I think it's a good comment. And like, I don't, first of all, if people think that, then they don't know you very well. And secondly, there's always going to be people out there that have opinions, but
I know.
I would argue, and then we'll move on to the subject as well. One of many things you guys have done right, you have the best brokerage website in residential real estate.
Oh, thanks.
You do. Like, anybody who doesn't understand that is like not
We'll
understanding.
keep working on it.
No, it's a gorgeous site. You guys have thought through the consumer experience. You're trying, as I said, trying new things as well. And you've pushed the industry to do things that they wouldn't normally do, also because you're innovating. So don't stop. And as I've learned, there's lots of people who hate the crap that I talk about. And to me, that's just noise. Keep focused on your vision, and you're going to keep pushing it. And that'll be the segue. So you have been vocal about, obviously, the suits and specifically NAR and just sort of the things that have been involved in all of this. What are your thoughts on the settlement that they put together? If you can talk about that, or even at least the terms, like, what are your thoughts on where things are? And I know decoupling has been something you've been, at least what I've read, I think you've been pushing for that.
Yeah.
So what can you tell me about those things?
Well, you buttered me up by talking about my candor, and now I have to be careful because
I
we
understand.
are a defendant in the lawsuit. I think there's a world where buyers pay their buyer's agent,
Okay.
and it's fine. It will still come out of the proceeds. I think it'll force Redfin and everyone else in this industry to be more innovative. And one form that can take is by competing to offer better service to justify a higher fee. It can also be competing to get more efficient so that people who need a lower fee can get it.
Right.
But I generally think that the party hiring you should be the one who has a say in how much you're paying and how much you're paid, excuse me. As far as the settlement itself goes, I don't even know where to start. There's
You
so
and
much
everybody
there.
else. Right. Yeah.
Yeah. It's really unclear what impact it will have on the industry. And I do think that if we are in a world where consumers have to pay their own agent, we have to figure out how that's going to work for veterans and first-time home buyers. James and Keith, this has been an issue that I think
Of course.
you've really been effective at discussing, and I'm glad you have. Like, I don't think everyone should be forced to hire an agent. If they don't want to hire an agent, don't hire an agent.
Yeah. And they don't have
if
to
you really
today.
believe in the value of what we're doing,
Yeah.
you know that people will pay for it. But there are people who need it the most are going to be the ones, I think, who are going to struggle to find a way to pay for it. And if they include it in their offer with a VA loan, that's going to be hard. And even just trying to bid on a starter home,
Right.
investor activity is so strong in that segment already.
Yeah.
Investors are going to be the ones who are able to put in a cash offer without any fee set aside for the buyer's agent. All of that is something that we have to figure out. With Alina as my witness, Alina is the PR person who's on the call with me. I had written this little essay about how, we have public defenders. Why don't we have that for realtors too? And then I come to find, just researching YouTube before this meeting, that you proposed the same thing. Great minds think alike.
Yeah.
It's there's a lot of things in the settlement. If I'm going to summarize, so the idea of a buyer meeting with an agent, choosing what they want out of an agent, even if they don't want an agent, they technically can do that today, obviously. But we all know on this call that there's a lot of risk to being unrepresented in a infrequent transaction. but them choosing to pay what the agent is worth and what the agent can articulate. I'm not against that world. I've been vocal about that. Like, I don't actually have a problem with that.
I know.
And I do worry.
That's because we believe in our people.
We
Yeah.
do.
We
And
believe in our
I also think we can all agree that like everyone's got to level up a little bit. And if it causes professional, there's going to be like in any business, there's different tier structures. There always has been, but you can have different options. I worry that they're without proper planning on this, that we're going to potentially hurt veterans, low income Americans, minorities, because we all know that real estate is the largest generation of wealth. It generates more wealth than anything else. And this is one of those scenarios where we had this, like I said, we were interviewing Kevin Sears, and we're like, this is where NAR needs to go hard, is in on.
What did he say? I haven't seen this one.
So yeah, it's not out yet. So the answer is this is actually where, which will be a question we'll get to in a moment, but NAR has a lot of stuff it needs to figure out, but this is actually where they're good. They know everybody in Congress. This isn't a matter of Fannie and Freddie, changing the rules. They will change the rules if Congress tells them to change the rules. And this is where advocacy comes in to make these things come into play. And I think it's incredibly important that everyone is thinking about a way to make sure whatever representation you want, that I'm gonna reverse this, that you're not having to be forced to use the public defender, or that you can use Johnny Cochran. First lawyer I could think of, apologize, bad joke, but like you can choose whatever you want to do.
He's a lawyer. He's still a lawyer.
Yeah, that's accurate.
There's a lot of challenges I think the industry needs to face. And I was talking to an insurance company yesterday, and I was asking them, what are some of the most common claims that happen in a real estate transaction? And in the top 10 are lack of disclosure, which agents can help you look for what you need to be seen. Like that comes from experience. Unrepresented buyer, another one.
Which translates to lack of disclosure, right?
And then dual agency.
Which also translates to.
Oh, do you want to talk about this one?
Ooh.
Do you know that I've gone through a great night of the soul on dual agency?
Oh, okay.
I'm worried I'm going to pick a fight with you.
I don't think so. Well, maybe.
Probably not.
We have strong opinions, but go.
Well, for almost Redfin's entire history, we have not allowed any of our agents ever to practice dual agency.
Okay.
And it has been a really strong prohibition. I just didn't see how one agent could represent both sides and be a true fiduciary to the buyer and the seller.
Yes.
And recently, we have reversed that position.
Okay. Curious.
And here's why. We have had sellers say to us that I'm hiring you to sell this house. You are my fiduciary. If a buyer wants to buy this house, I want you to sell it to them. And if both the buyer and the seller do not want to pay two agents, who are you to say that we have to? That has been their argument to me. And as a true believer in the position that I think you have espoused against dual agency.
Very much.
Yeah.
I struggled to win that argument. And this is before the NAR settlement. This was in July of 2023, where some of our brokers just came forward and said, why are we forcing everyone to hire two agents if both parties in the transaction don't want to do that? And if we disclose the limits of our advocacy to each, and each want that, and they're doing it so that they can save money on fees, why are you stopping us? And I felt like I didn't have a great comeback to that. And I'm not trying to pick a fight here.
No, yeah.
I'm just trying to tell you that I really started very far over where y'all are.
Yeah. Mine is the same agent is where I stand, not in the two agents in the same company is different. I think it's a level of risk. What are you willing to accept? Because if you look at, and Keith, we're in the Bay Area and you know this market as well. I go back a few years when dual agency was happening in MLS listings down in Silicon Valley. And I remember it was about 30% of the properties were being sold off market. At the time, Alon Pinnell Realtors, before they were Compass, was still the company down there. I remember
that was their move.
But I remember having a conversation with the executive running the MLS listings was Jim Harrison. And he was telling me,
I remember him too.
Yeah, right. We've all been around a while.
Yeah.
He was telling me 30% of the listings were being sold off market at that time. And we were having this conversation over lunch, and he's like, you know what's also popping up now? All over the place, lawsuits are occurring because the seller sold the property off market. The agent handled both sides of the deal, and then they saw a listing come on the market 6 months later for $750,000 more. And then they started suing everybody because they were like, why did we do it off market? And you didn't have my best interest at heart because you represented the buyer. And candidly, and this is for, I'm sure, the lawyers listening, all of our forms currently, even in Missouri, have disclosed how compensation was going to be paid. Doesn't mean anything because you and I both know once you get sued, you're defending the case anyway. And then, so my comment is, I don't disagree with you. And it's not that there aren't scenarios for it. It's just, to me, that's this versus what everybody keeps saying it's for. And I don't know I don't know what the answer is.
I think it's for the only defensible argument for it is the one you proposed, right? Which is, if I have a seller who wants it and everybody's been fully disclosed, and I think that's why it's ethical and legal and can be done all the time. I just think the question is at what point are you the advisor? And then at what point are you a helmet law, right? And we are willing to give away some of our freedoms and flexibilities. I'm probably gonna get some hate mail for this, but that's fine. In an effort to have a functional, a safe environment, right? And like an attorney can back out if a client isn't going to listen to them, the attorney can get out of working with that client. There are ways in which they can do that. And is this one at the point where I think it needs to be a required helmet law? I'm not sure. The hard part is the edge use cases, right? So I think there are rare situations at which it makes sense. Yeah. But that can turn
family, neighbors.
Correct. Well, no, I get those.
Yeah.
And I want to separate two issues. I think one is about dual agency and one is about off-market sales.
Yeah.
Redfin has benefited enormously, as every broker has, from the MLS. And my stump speech used to be at every conference, just going around saying that regardless of how you feel about cooperation on fees, cooperation on listings, creating a fair, open marketplace where we all put the listings in. How do we not do that when we've been getting the listings out to power our website, to power our brokerage? It's just fair and fair alike. And so on that point,
and it's
putting listings in the MLS.
And it's what the human being wants, right? The human being who is looking for property, whom we should serve at the end.
The buyer,
they don't really care about our stuff, right? I just want to be able to, you guys just show me what's available for sale so I can figure out if I want to buy it. Yeah. That's all they really care about.
Yeah. That's why we've had such a hard time with the loophole and clear cooperation. I don't know what we're going to do about that because I've wasted so much time and energy trying to convince MLSs, trying to convince NAR to close the loophole. The whole reason we joined NAR was really, 7-8 years ago, we wanted to help with this campaign against pocket listings. And now we've put ourselves into an impossible position as an industry where if you're going to allow it, what as a operator of a broker are we supposed to do when our competition, is selling market listings? So I wish that we had a policy around that we could truly enforce to make sure that all the homes for sale got into the public market.
Did you see the study? And we'll move on from Bright MLS. I think we just posted it last week. They did a study for 2 years. Yeah, it was is it key 17% of it was 17%, I think was. Yeah. I remember I'm going to go with a conservative number. It was like the houses sold for 17% more when they were on the MLS versus off. And in a
that's a
very big market dynamic.
Meaningful.
Like a meaningful data set. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, so I know we don't have all of your time, so we'll ask you two last questions. I'll let Keith wrap
Oh,
up with
sure.
the final.
Sorry.
So
Okay.
no, you're fine. So Keith always loves this question. It's really his. So if you were the U.S. real estate czar for a year with
This is
all
my
of the
favorite
affordability headwinds that we've got, what would you do to solve it? Like if you were in charge of everything real estate, like
Build more houses.
and there's that.
You know, there has been
That's simple
a
solution.
political debate about the best way to create more affordable housing. And mostly Americans have settled that debate by voting with their feet. And I say this as someone who has espoused some progressive positions at least, but states that have deregulated housing, that have made it easier to build more housing, win. And we don't need more low-cost housing, more expensive housing. We need more housing, period. And there's no way to solve the problem if you don't do that. You know, there's other parts of this that we can talk about around the fees paid to real estate agents and the rest, but the main thing we need to do is create more housing.
Yeah. It's so funny to me when I was listening to those conversations, and I'm not political about it either, but listening to the agenda by the administration and then some of his stump speeches in Vegas, I'm just like, if you want to solve the housing issue, it's not, it's create more housing. This is simple supply and demand economics 101. This is like high school economics class. So,
well, the good news is that California was the last one to realize this. The red tape around building was insane.
Yeah.
And then a bunch of mayors lost their jobs in both San Francisco and LA. And now I think even at a state level, there's all these laws that had been voted down decisively just 5 years ago, you know, that required parking if you were going to build, that had all sorts of zoning requirements, that limited ADUs. All of that stuff just got blown away because the state finally got it that people are leaving for Texas and Florida, and we've got to do something
in mass.
Perfect.
Yeah.
But then you still have, not to belabor the nuances of this, because we did make you the real estate czar of the United States. You had supreme power to do whatever you wanted. But it's even where it gets bogged down very often is at the local level, the local municipality level, that sort of not in my backyard mentality of, I want more housing built, just not next to me. Right.
Yeah. Well, we're also mixed in our feelings about affordable housing. If you told half of Americans, the one who already own houses, that home prices are going down,
of course,
they would not feel the same way about that as they
would
about
build them over there.
Gas, cheap whatever.
Build them over there.
They would be like, keep the prices high. And they effectively function as a cartel to limit construction so that they can protect the value of their own asset.
Everyone's in it for himself. All right, Keith, wrap this up.
Usually this has to be an esoteric question, but this is actually like a direct question since you are the CEO of a brokerage. I usually say if you were an agent or a brokerage, but for you, I will say since you are a brokerage, what's the one thing, if you could implement it today, if you could snap your fingers and have it be fully into your organization to help it over this next 12 to 24 month period, what's the one thing you would implement?
Well, only about a third of our agents are on this all variable plan. So let's roll that out. I think the other big change for us is just going to be, I know this is a very BS-y sounding answer, but we're just trying to figure out how to use artificial intelligence on our website to answer all these questions. And when, you know, the way that we've implemented it that I hope is a little different is, you know, the hard part is training the AI to know when someone needs to talk to someone. And the reason we had to do it in the first place is most people ask questions like, is this home for sale? Yes. Can I rent it out? No. And so protecting our people from some of that has been good. And figuring out, oh, you know, this is a person who really needs help. They are thinking about moving. And it's time to get them in front of a human being. That has been a really tricky problem for us. And I, you know, if I could wave my magic wand, that's the one I want to solve.
Smart.
We'll leave you with this. A friend of ours is doing some AI through voice, voice technology. And it was on it.
crazy.
I'll send you a link to it, Glenn, because you have to listen to it. He did 2 lead calls where a client called in and was talking to call center, and then client calls in and is talking to AI, like full on artificial intelligence having a conversation, and it freaked me out. I was like, it was as good, if not better, than the call center with how it was communicating and talking.
Yeah. Oh my god!
And we were just like,
it was crazy.
Keith and I were like, what is happening right now? You know,
because the call center rep got like a frustrated phone person
yeah,
on the other end.
AI
of the phone,
doesn't,
and he could not wait to get off the phone call. Like the call center rep was like, yeah, this sale's going nowhere. Whereas the AI would just, okay, next logical question.
It was
crazy.
It was trippy. It was trippy. Yeah.
Man, next thing you know, you're going to tell me that you two are AIs. It's going to freak me out.
Not yet.
No, you guys have so much personality. Keep it real as a mofo.
There's no way it could
I
learn
know who you are.
James. Yeah, not possible.
I would be scared to meet my AI. Yeah.
Wouldn't we all? Glenn, thank you. Thank you for being here. It was always a pleasure to hear you talk about stuff. We love your honesty and candor and just authenticity. I'm going to keep using those words.
Yeah.
And just, talking about the things you've done well and not, is good for people to hear. And I think that also, like, I walked away from it going, it's okay to talk about the things you didn't do right either. Mm-hmm. And that makes you human and also a great leader.
You knew that already. So, that's why you
guys
got together in the first place.
But you said it into a microphone.
Yeah,
but you said it into a microphone, and not everyone has the courage to be that vulnerable. So
yeah, for sure.
Yeah,
for sure.
Conversation.
So, well, I look forward to
keep up the great work.
Thanks. We appreciate that. And if you're at an event, look forward to seeing you in person, and we'll get a beer and talk about all the new stuff.
Yeah,
and a burger works good. All right, my friend. Appreciate you.
Glenn.
Thanks.
Thanks, guys.
It's our job to say out loud what everybody's only thinking to themselves. It's your job to subscribe to this podcast so you never miss an episode.